the final science lecture series of this school year. Plans are already underway for the series that will start in the fall, so you can watch for the flyer. Those of you who need to sign up for credit in the faculty, please see me after we give you a name. Today our speaker is Greg Forbes from the biology department, and Greg has been away from campus for too long a time in Australia, and what he's going to talk about is related to the work that he's been doing there with Australian turtles. So, Greg, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and do this without getting caught in all the spider webs down here. I don't know. I kind of know how my dog feels when I'm really chained to the front lawn now. But I'd like to thank you for coming here today and allowing me to discuss with you a topic which is becoming an increasingly more important component of my life. And that component and that topic, of course, is sea turtles. First thing you may think is, this guy's not well balanced. Why are turtles any component of his life, let alone an increasing component of his life? And people used to say, well, after all, they're not warm, they're slimy. When you hug them, they don't hug back, and they don't have warm noses. Well, they're not slimy, they're not exactly cold, and it's true they don't hug back when you hug them, but neither does a horse, thank God, and people like horses. And as far as the warm noses, no, they don't have a warm nose, but they certainly have a wet nose. So they actually are kind of neat little animals. Now, people still say, well, how on earth can you get interested in studying sea turtles? And I've always had a hard time trying to come up with an answer to that. I guess the best way to respond to that is to try and draw an analogy between sea turtles and blind dates. Blind dates, they're not always the best looking, but if you give them a chance, sometimes they're a lot of fun and they have great personalities. It's kind of the same way with sea turtles. And I guess the best example of that occurred with a gentleman by the name of Robert Bussard, who's kind of the godfather of sea turtle research in the Southern Hemisphere. He worked for the Australian National Museum back in the 50s and 60s, and he was on his way to the Galapagos Islands in 1963 to study geckos. Gecko's a funny little tropical lizard about this big that has funny little eyes on it. He was a gecko specialist. So he was going to go to the Galapagos to study geckos. And in the route, he was going to stop by this little island he heard about called Heron Island in the southern Great Barrier Reef and check out this sea turtle thing. He'd heard that sea turtles nested there and it was easy to get there and look at these sea turtles. So he took a boat out. At that time, it took a full day to get out there. He got out there just before dusk during breeding season, and he was just in time to see a turtle crawl up on the beach. He immediately threw all the stuff onto the beach, ran and sat next to this turtle, and watched it nest. Unfortunately, he chose the wrong turtle as his first one. It was a green sea turtle. They take up to 7 hours to nest. He spent the night with this turtle. He fell so in love with this turtle that he didn't make it to the Galapagos till 11 years later. He was so infatuated with these turtles that he just decided, this is the animal I want to study. The heck with this gecko stuff. I'm in the turtle business now. And he was basically the second international turtle researcher on this planet. And so what he did, like the blind ape, he gave him a chance. If you get a chance to know these things, I think you'll appreciate them a lot more. And that's what I want to try and do for you today, is give you an introduction to these animals, so hopefully you'll appreciate them a whole lot more. Now, unfortunately, I can't take you out and show you turtles. Because we're out of the turtle area up here in Central and Southern California. What I am going to try and do is show you some slides that I took when I spent my year and a half on Heron Island, which is in the Southern Barrier Reef in Queensland, Australia, doing my PhD research studying green sea turtles. And I'll try and bring into this room some of the ambiance of turtles, and hopefully at the end of our talk today, you'll have a great appreciation for what's happening to turtles, and maybe next time you see one at SeaWorld, you just won't say, turtles, where are the furry things, and keep on going. Okay? So before we get started, a lot of people have asked me, are you going to talk about the difference between turtles and tortoises? And I will real briefly before I show you the slides. The basic difference between turtles and tortoises is the fact that tortoises, this is a California desert tortoise, and these are, you say, where did you get these? These were pets that died at my house. Anything that dies at my house, they get freeze-dried. My wife's very concerned that she's going to die before I do. I already have the big little arm like that for the umbrella rack, little ashtray over there, so why throw them away? So this is Rosie right here, and this is a California desert tortoise, and she has what are called elephantine feet, elephant-like feet. She walks flat on her feet. And this is one of the things that makes a tortoise a tortoise. Another thing that makes a tortoise is that, you see, tortoises are kind of like generic animals. They don't have an opening for the urogenital canal. They don't have an opening for the excretory canal. They have a single opening called a cloaca. It turns out that turtles have a special gland around the cloaca called an anal gland that allows them to do funny things with their cloaca. They can breathe through it. When they're hibernating, they can actually bury into the mud and they can actually exchange gases through their, yes, okay, through their cloaca, okay? But tortoises can't do that. So that's really the big difference between a tortoise and a turtle. The elephant-type feet on the tortoise and the lack of this anal gland. Whereas turtles, like this little box turtle right here, doesn't have the elephantine feet, and it does have the anal gland. And this is one of the reasons these things are called turtles. What we're going to be talking about today are not tortoises, and we're going to be speaking about one type of turtle. We're going to be talking about marine turtles, in which we'll have a whole bunch of different slides of the different types of turtles. This little one right here is a green sea turtle, and these did not die at my house. These were things that tourists brought in across the Ensenada border with turtles under their arms, and the customs people said, "Excuse me, we'd like your turtles." So these were all confiscated animals. Okay, and this one's a hawksbill sea turtle. We'll be talking about this in greater detail in just a minute. So, without further ado, as the saying goes, what I'd like to do is give you a little introduction to sea turtle biology, introduce the 7 different types of sea turtles to you, and then talk a little bit about the research that I'm doing and the group I'm involved in is doing in Australia, and then we'll conclude with a prognosis for the sea turtles on the planet. What's going to happen to the sea turtles? How are they doing? Are we going to see any in the next century? So if you could turn the lights off, please, we'll get started on the slides. Okay, what we're going to do here then is take a survey of the different types of turtles that are found on the world. We'll talk about the sizes, where they occur, and what they eat, basically what they do for a living, before we get into the research aspect of this. What we're going to do is start out with the world's smallest turtles, and we're going to work our way up to the largest turtles. Now, there are only 7 species of turtles on this planet. The smallest is this one right here, which is called an Olive's Ridley turtle. They occur in the Pacific. And what's unique about the olive ridley turtle, besides its very, very small size, it has this unique ability to nest in very, very large numbers called arabatas. It turns out that these turtles will wait offshore for all of their friends to come by, basically. They wait for several thousand other olive green turtles. Sometime in excess of 30 to 40,000 olive greens will congregate right off the beach. And then a couple nights following the full moon, they all come up on the beach at once and lay their eggs. Now, this is a daytime arabata, and this is why you don't see a whole bunch of turtles on the beach. If this were a nighttime arabata, you could see on a half-mile beach as much as 30 to 40,000 turtles laying their eggs all at once. It's really one of the great things that we find in nature. And only the 2 species of Ridley turtles are capable of doing this. And that causes some problems, as we'll talk about later on. See all the little white things all over the beach? Look like ping pong balls? Guess what? Turtle eggs. If you and 39,000 of your closest friends are up there all digging nests at one time, what's your chance of your friend digging up your nest? Very, very good. But they've been doing it for millions of years, and it's worked out quite well. And if you see an arabata, you're lucky, because there are only about 4 left in the world. There used to be many, many arabatas in Central America, which is the only place they occur. But once they were discovered, of course, it was a great point for exploitation, because you can go onto the beach and you can harvest basically 40,000 turtles a night for all the way up to about 2 to 3 weeks running. And so the arabatas are definitely on their way out, but they're only possessed by these Ridley sea turtles. Now, the Ridley turtles are endangered species, as are all of the species of sea turtles we're going to talk about today, with the exception of 1. Now, these things are endangered for a variety of reasons. We'll be talking about that at the conclusion. But what we want to do is, first of all, figure out what these things eat for a living, because this is an important component of where they are. What is this thing? Can you make it out? Yeah, it's a little lobster. It's a little crayfish. And so they feed upon the bottom of the ocean, where they feed upon crayfish, and they also feed upon things like this. This is a sea cucumber, this kind of cryptically colored in the center. Basically, these turtles, Ridley turtles in general, eat anything on the bottom that's smaller than their face. If they can catch it and they can get it in, they'll eat it. No priorities whatsoever. And that's why they do so well in very, very large numbers. Now, the Ridley sea turtle, the olive Ridley sea turtle, has a very close relative, which is this guy right here, which is the most critically endangered species of sea turtle. It's called the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. And the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle nests in one place in the world, about 200 miles south into Mexico of the Texas border. There used to be 40,000 that would come up on the beach in one night. Now we're down to about 350 turtles total for the entire season. They're endangered for a variety of reasons we'll talk about later on, but it doesn't look very good for the prognosis for this little Ridley turtle. Now, the Ridley turtles, who said are the smallest turtles, this animal right here is only about the size of a garbage can lid. So they only weigh in pounds about 55 to 65 pounds, a very, very small turtle. There are actually some species of freshwater turtles that get larger.
than these animals. And just like the olive Ridley turtle, the Kemp's Ridley turtle likes to feed upon crustaceans, little things like shrimp and lobsters and all of their allies. And they also feed upon little things called sea pins, which are related to corals and sea anemones. That's a real popular food item. But once again, they're working their way across the bottom of the ocean, and anything that happens to be there, they'll eat. And that's one of the reasons that these turtles are so successful. In fact, all the turtle species in general, all 7 of them, have been on this planet relatively unchanged for the last 170 million years. That's a quite impressive fossil history, relatively unchanged. So they're designed just perfectly for what they do for a living. Now, here's a species of sea turtle, a different one, a little bit larger now, still an endangered species, called a hawksbill. It's called a hawksbill sea turtle for obvious reasons. If you look at the beak on this thing, it kind of looks like the beak or the bill of a hawk. And it uses this special hawksbill design to get sponges and tunicates off the rock, which I'll show you some pictures of in just a second. But what's the most famous or even infamous about this turtle is its shell. I'll tell you why in just a second. Take a look at the shell. Is that in focus for you folks? Okay. This is a little hawksbill sea turtle. This little guy right here is probably only about 15 years old. Now, if you look closely at the shell, it has some incredible designs in it. In fact, if we get a little bit closer, you see that each of the individual scales, called scutes, don't articulate together, which means they're not basically welded together. They overlap like pages of a book. And because of that, you can get them off the turtle. You can pull them off the turtle. And people pull them off the hawksbill sea turtle to make tortoiseshell jewelry. And this is what you see up on the top here. This animal was critically endangered because of the tortoiseshell trade. Japan alone imports in excess of 60,000 adult hawksbill sea turtles a year. The world consumption is in excess of 200,000 hawksbill sea turtles per year just for the tortoiseshell trade. Tortoiseshell doesn't come from tortoises, it comes from hawksbill sea turtles. Now, hawksbill sea turtles, excuse me, it turns out are toxic. You can't eat them. If you eat them, you die. Short and simple. So unfortunately, though, that doesn't save them from being taken because it's just their shell that they're harvested for. To give you an idea of the value of this, here's an animal that came off of Heron Island. This is a hawksbill sea turtle. It's still a subadult. Look at the beautiful shell. This is the type of shell that brings the highest money. This animal in Southeast Asia would sell, the shell alone would sell for about $600 US. So imagine a family then that has an annual income of $300 to $400 US, and this swims by their boat. Are they worried about conservation? No, and you can't blame them. We would do the same thing in their position. So it's a really, really big problem. Japan has just said that we're not going to import the same quantity we've done in the last couple of years, but they never said when they're going to stop importing these. So the hawksbill sea turtles are definitely on their way out. They're probably the second most critically endangered species of sea turtle besides that Kemp's Ridley sea turtle that we've already showed you. Now, what's interesting about these things is they're animals that change dramatically in color as they get older. If they can make it to this size, and it's hard for size comparisons here, to give you an idea, here's a footprint right here of a human from here to here. So this isn't even an adult turtle, but in the subadult stage, they turn dark black. And that's of no value to the tortoiseshell trade. So if they can get to be this big, they've got it. Nobody's going to harvest them because they're poisonous and the shell is already dark. The reason they're poisonous, we believe, is because of what these animals eat for a living. They eat pencils, and there's some seaweed in here for size comparison. Okay? And the lead poisoning now. Okay. Now, what they eat is they eat a whole variety of different types of seaweeds which have toxins in them. And they also eat sponges, a whole variety of different types of sponges, and a little thing called a tunicate. A little tunicate is kind of like strawberry jam sucking on a rock in the ocean. It's an interesting creature. It just kind of looks like jelly on a rock, and they love to eat these things. And it turns out some of the sponges, some of the seaweeds, and some of the tunicates they eat are toxic. And if you are what you eat and you eat toxic creatures, then you're going to wind up being toxic yourself. So if they can make it to that critical age, they're going to do just fine. But it doesn't look like they're going to survive to that critical age to where they turn dark. Another species of sea turtle we have, the fourth species, is this guy right here, which is called a loggerhead sea turtle. The loggerheads are aptly named. You look at the size of that head, this is a mammoth turtle. These things get up to be, pound-wise, about 150 to 200 pounds. Their heads can be as much as 11.5 inches wide. Their heads are that large to accommodate the large jaw muscles that go onto them. And they're very, very aggressive animals, as we'll talk about in a second. But what you see down below here is not a torpedo. You know what this thing is? It's a little fish called remora. Yeah, it has a modified dorsal fin, and they hang out on the bottom of all the sea turtles because sea turtles are sloppy eaters. They just bite whatever comes off the rock, and little tidbits float in the water, and then remoras just gobble it up, so they get a free ride. So it's real common to see remoras on a lot of different types of marine creatures. Now, as I said, loggerheads are very aggressive. This is why when I show you later on about how we catch sea turtles, when we catch loggerheads, we don't let them walk around the boat. We are into turtle bondage on the side of the boat. We put their little faces into the side of the boat and we tie their flippers, because what they'll do is they'll actually come to the front of the boat and bite you. And as I said, the head's going to be 11.5 inches wide. The masseter muscles, the muscles that move the jaw, are actually implanted into the skull instead of, can you close the door please, instead of onto the skull, because they're so large. So if they get a hold of your leg, they can literally bite through and break a human leg. So we don't give them boat privileges. We tie them to the side. And when you go underwater, especially on night dives, you have your lights on there. You like to come in and see what's going on. And then you turn around and you see this guy coming at you. It's really kind of disheartening. So loggerheads, as a general rule, are the animals you don't want to play around with. Occasionally, you can find one that is very, very docile. Now, loggerheads, I said, are named that because of the large head. They also have an easy identification factor. If you look at their neck, see the little gray turtleneck sweater? Very easy to identify. And loggerheads are found around the world, as are all of these species of turtles. Keep in mind that all these species of turtles occur in all the tropical waters of the world, subtropical, temperate. In the case of the largest turtle called leatherback, they actually occur all the way up to Greenland and British Columbia. But most of these are tropical species, so wherever you find warm water, you're going to find these turtles. Now the loggerhead here has kind of a unique diet. If you look at the mandible here, the jaw up on top, you can see it's kind of broken apart. The normal jawline should come down along here. It turns out that these turtles feed upon really one of two things. They either feed upon giant clams, such as this one right here, or they feed upon real small gastropods or snails. Here's a giant clam. If you can't make it out, little lips right here, kind of looks like Mick Jagger, okay, wrapped inside of a shell. Now, these are giant Pacific clams. The shell on these things is in excess of 1.5 inches of solid calcium. They come along with these beaks and they bite through the shell. They just grunt, they bite it. Imagine your leg in that mouth. And so you can tell an animal that's a clam eater, because it turns out only the clam eaters have the broken up jaw. If they have a nice, beautiful, straight jaw, they're feeding upon the little tidbits. They're feeding upon these little things called gastropods, little snails. So you have this very, very large animal that's feeding upon either very small snails or these big Pacific clams. Kind of a unique diet. Now, the only species of sea turtle that isn't really critically endangered on this planet is this guy, which is an endemic. Endemic means it's limited to one area. It occurs nowhere else. This is an endemic species to Australia. It's called the Australian flatback for obvious reasons. It only occurs on the north coast of Australia, where basically nobody lives. And that's probably the primary reason why these things aren't harvested and they're not endangered to any great extent, because they occur in a part of the world where nobody else is at this time. And they occur all across the top of Australia where they nest, and they're doing reasonably well. It's called a flatback once again because of the top flat back, and also it has an interesting shell design. It doesn't have those hard bony coverings called scutes that we showed you on the hawksbill. You could actually take your thumbnail and run it down the shell of this animal, and it will get blood blisters all the way down. So when these things get caught up in nets of fishing boats, they're really damaged quite severely because they actually have a very, very fragile shell on the back of them. As was the case with the Ridley sea turtles, these things tend to eat anything that they can get their mouth on once again, including one of the greatest hits here, shrimp. And this is one of the reasons we have problems with turtles being trapped in shrimp nets, because they're down there feeding on the shrimps, then we drag nets across the seafloor bottom and we pick up some turtles, and we'll talk about that later on. So they're not doing very well with respect to shrimp fisheries when they occur in the same area, because shrimp is an important component of their diet and they tend to get entrapped in the nets. They also tend to feed upon bottom fish, anything that they can catch. Kind of the general rule of thumb is in nature is the smaller you are, the faster you are. Like when you're trying to catch your little brother, remember your little brother used to make you mad and you try and catch him, you can never get him, he's always too fast. Same thing is true when an animal tries to catch a fish. Something as large as a sea turtle. They usually can't get the fish, so they feed upon fish that are slower, like this flounder, a halibut type fish. They feed upon benthic fish, those that live in the seafloor bottom. Now, first to last species of sea turtle, number 6 here in our scenario, is this animal, which is a green sea turtle. And the green sea turtle is the second to the largest of the sea turtles. The green sea turtle is the animal that I work on. They get to be quite large, and we'll show you some pictures of some large ones in just a second, but they also are critically endangered, primarily because this is what has been referred to as the world's most important reptile. Economically, because everybody around the world eats the green sea turtle. That's the primary reason the green sea turtle is on its way out, is because everybody consumes this guy. Now, they're not called green sea turtles because they're green. In fact, they come in a whole variety of different shapes, designs, and colors. Like this animal right here, which has some beautiful coloration on it. And this is just a youngster, probably only about 35 years old. They come in kind of a chestnut brown, which doesn't look anything like the one that you just saw. And then we have this animal, which is kind of a greenish color on the shell. And then they even come in a nice jet black variety, which is what we have off Mexico and Southern California. So why are they called green sea turtles? They're called green sea turtles because when you butcher them up, there's a cartilage-type material that lines the inside of their body that has a greenish tint to it. And it's that green cartilage-like material that's harvested to make turtle soup and other turtle products. And that's where the term green turtle comes from. But once again, they're not doing very well either. To give you an idea of how many green turtles there used to be, in the Caribbean, you're familiar with probably the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands, we believe, had some of the largest green sea turtle nesting in the world at one point. In fact, when you look at the early Spanish journals, they used to navigate west in the Caribbean by following the migrations of turtles. They could even navigate at night because there'd be so many turtles banging against the hull of the ship that they knew they were in the direct path to the Caymans. If they didn't hear turtles banging against the bottom of the boat, they knew they weren't going towards the Cayman Islands. Once they got close to the Cayman Islands, there were so many turtles that would actually impede the progress of the ship. The ship would slow down because there were so many turtles in the water. Today, green sea turtles no longer nest basically anywhere in the Caribbean because they've just been consumed. So it's not looking real good for the green sea turtle. Now, I said turtles come in a variety of different sizes. With respect to the green sea turtle, what we have here on top is an adult male. Now, for size comparison, once again, here's somebody's footprint right down here. That's a size 12, okay, right there. Now, the males, it turns out, a little bit smaller than the females. On green sea turtles, the females can get up to be in excess of 500 pounds. That's a big animal. Now, they're mature in Australia when they're in the ripe old age of about 50. 50 is when they mature in Australia, about 35 years old in the Caribbean. So the turtle in the middle you see there is an animal that's about 25 to 35 years old. See the hatchling down at the bottom? That's a fresh one. That's a 24-hour model, okay? That's a 1990 model, okay? This is about a 1970 model, and this one's probably 45 years old. Okay, so they come in a variety of different sizes, and this is one of the largest turtles that we find, the green sea turtle. I think that Mother Nature or God practiced on all other species of sea turtles before designing the green sea turtle. The nicest personality, the nicest everything. Now, what do these things eat for a living? We'll be talking about that in greater detail. That's part of my study. But turtles, green sea turtles, as is the case with all of these sea turtles, can live either in coral reef communities or they can live in seagrass communities. So it depends upon where they're living as to what they eat with respect to green sea turtles. My turtles live in a coral reef community, so this is what it looks like in the morning when you wake up and you're a green sea turtle and say, what should I have today? What am I going to chew on? Now, right in front of your cute little face here, you have coral. Not very good, so you have to look for something else. And so when you read all of the literature, you find out that sea turtles, of course, feed upon turtleweed. This green stuff right here. It's everywhere in the coral reef. It's bright green. It looks like something you should eat. And all of the turtle books and everything says they love this stuff. I've flushed the stomachs of 600 turtles now. 2 of them have had turtleweed inside. It's poisonous. Nothing eats it, okay? So it's called turtleweed. Maybe the turtles like to look at it, but they certainly don't eat it. It's toxic. So what do they eat? Well, they love to eat this stuff. Looks like sea grapes, something called caulerpa. It's a real common human food item in Japan. And it is also toxic. I tried it. My God. Ooh, you wish you were dead. Really, really bitter. Sea turtles love it. They think it's the greatest thing since cotton candy and Jell-O. I mean, they gobble this stuff down all the time when it's available. They also eat this stuff right here, which looks like something rude that you wouldn't want to step on in the backyard at night barefooted. But this is something called codium. This is an algae that actually floats at the surface, and it's a real popular food item. I mean, they gobble this stuff down every time they can find it. They also like this green slime right here. Certain times of the year at the bottom of the lagoon is green slime starts growing. It's in the genus Ateromorpha, which means intestine-like form, and that's what it feels like. That's what it looks like. And when this stuff starts blooming in the lagoons of the reef I work on, these turtles are just like cattle. They come up off the reef slopes. You have whole herds of them sometimes grazing in these areas. You'll have sometimes 10 turtles in one area feeding upon this stuff. They just think it's like cotton candy. So a really high energy food. Now, the last species of sea turtle that we haven't discussed at this point is the leatherback sea turtle. It's the largest of all the species of the sea turtles. It is also critically endangered. Could you try and focus that a little bit, please? It's a critically endangered species because of exploitation of their eggs when they come up to nest on the beach. We don't harvest these things because it's the only species of sea turtle that's found in the open ocean. So we know very little about them. All the other species of turtles we've talked about are what we call littoral species. They occur right along the coastline. But the leatherback occurs out in the open ocean. So we know very little about them. They're called leatherbacks for obvious reasons. They have this leathery type appearance to the shell. It turns out they lack the majority of bones in their shell. Other turtles you can actually stand upon and it won't injure them because they have a nice bony shell underneath those scales. This animal just has skin on its back with a couple rudimentary bones in it. So it basically just has a leathery back. And they get to be quite large. The largest one ever recorded just washed up dead on the beach of Wales 3 years ago. It weighed 2 metric tons, 2,200 pounds. It measured just across the top of the shell 151 centimeters. So that comes out to what, about the size of this black counter up here, a little bit shorter than the black counter. A mammoth animal. And it died because it ate plastic bags. The reason it ate a plastic bag is not because it's a terribly stupid animal, because it turns out that these animals feed upon primarily jellyfish and something called a tunicate. So when you put a Ziploc bag in the water and you have a reptile that swims up, remember, reptiles are not the pinnacle of cerebral development, okay? They're hardwired. You know, it's like, oh, it looks like a jellyfish, and they come up and they gobble it down. Well, they can go ahead and digest something like this salp, as it's called, or something like this jellyfish, but when they suck down a Ziploc bag, they can't digest it. It blocks up the intestinal tract, and eventually they just back up and they hemorrhage internally and they die. And that's what happened to this largest leatherback ever found. It's a very important component. In fact, I was at SeaWorld this last weekend, and when they sell you Cokes, they take the plastic lids. They don't give them to you. They finally realized that, my God, how many Cokes are sold per day at SeaWorld? How many of those plastic lids wind up in the ocean? How many of those are eaten by turtles and whales and other animals that eat jellyfish? Quite a few. Marine plastics are a very, very serious pollution problem in the ocean. And leatherbacks, unfortunately, are taking it in the seat of the pants, or in the seat of the shell. So we have those 6 species of sea turtles, or 7, depending on what you call it. We had that Kemp's ridley, the most critically endangered. We had that Olive's ridley turtle. We also had the loggerhead turtle, the hawksbill, the Australian flatback, the green sea turtle, and the leatherback. The last species of turtle, and the only species of turtle that is increasing in numbers, which is really surprising, is this one. Okay? Unfortunately, they're everywhere. It's the only turtle that's coming along fast. Now, let's talk about what these guys do for a living. Now I know what the 6 different species of turtles are. What do they do in their life? Well, what we'll do here is follow the nesting cycle, the reproduction cycle. It turns out that turtles believe in the old human adage, the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill. Turtles swim thousands of miles, or sometimes just hundreds of miles, to breed in an area other than their feeding ground. You have a feeding ground at one time of the year, or one time of their life cycle. Another time they have their breeding ground. Turtles don't breed in the areas they live. And it's really kind of funny, because in Heron Island, where I work, in the Southern Barrier Reef, it's one of the most significant nesting beaches in the world. Our turtles that live on Heron Island don't nest there. They go somewhere else. The turtles that nest on Heron Island come from as much as 1,200 miles away, up in New Guinea and New Caledonia. Why don't our Heron Island turtles stay there? We know it's good enough. Thousands of turtles nest there every year. Makes a great genetic model. Say, well, all the turtles got together and decided for a gene diversity they should all swap places. Who knows why they do it? But they don't breed in the areas where they live. In fact, they don't even lay their eggs in the area where they were bred. It turns out in southern Australia, where I was working, we have the male sea turtles that wind up on your lagoon right around September, along with the females. The females are receptive at that point, and We don't know how they advertise to the males that they're receptive, but any male that's around there is going to mount anything that resembles a sea turtle, which is why you don't wear black wetsuits that time of the year. So what happens in this scenario, here we have the female on the bottom. The male comes along and then mounts the female. Now, how do you hold on? Well, you have some real problems, don't you? When you talk about reproduction in marine animals, we have the luxury as terrestrial animals of when we copulate, you have gravity in your favor. When the male's on top of the female, she's not going anywhere. What happens in the water? Think about it, okay? You get on top of her, she's out of there. She's out from underneath you. So things like whales, how do gray whales do it? They have a menage a trois. They have an inferior male on the bottom, or subordinate male, facing down. On his back is his female facing up, and then the dominant male on top. That guy's job on the bottom is just to do this as fast as he can, while the two up above are doing this. Humpback whales do it a little differently. Humpback whales go vertical in the water, and they wrap their flippers around each other. So you're out on the boat whale watching, going, oh, look, they're looking at us. No, they're not. They're going to be smoking cigarettes at any time. Sharks, how do sharks do it? Male shark comes along, bites the female's flipper. Her skin is twice as thick as his. Imagine a gentle love bite from a great white breeding you. Turns her over so she doesn't drop out of the way. Sea otters, male mounts the female, bites into her nose. Holds on to her nose while he's copulating. But the males have great staying power. They're on for as much as 3 hours. So when you see a little sea otter with a bright red nose, you know what she's been up to. So how do our sea turtles do it? Well, on the front of the male's flipper, they have very long claws that they hook on to the leading edge of the female, and she's not going anywhere, and they just hang on there. But before he mounts her, he comes up, and there's a little bit of courtship. He nuzzles into her little armpit right here and bites onto her flipper. And so they get a little chewed up. Once he's on there, he'll stay on for hours and hours and hours. In fact, it's not unusual to see the tide go out and this male going, gosh, it's awful warm up here, and there's a female still underneath him. Well, what happens if you're not first in line? Well, we have a male up here. Now, this is not homosexual activity. This is just frustrated male. And so what this guy is trying to do is dislodge this male. He'll actually come up and start biting right here to try and dislodge this male. They're almost never successful. This is why we put our flipper tags all the way in here, because otherwise they chew them off. So once you're the first male in town, you're there. Now, a female will be bred by as many as 20, 30 males over the couple days. And then the males leave. They go back several hundred miles to where they live. The sea turtles, the females then, won't lay at that reef. They'll then swim to another reef to lay their eggs. Now, the question we wondered was, do these turtles, which sperm do they use? Is it just if Jack is first in line, Jack is the father of all the eggs? One of our embryologists in the group I'm working in published a paper this year. We just found out. It turns out from doing some genetic work that she actually takes all the sperm from all the males that breed her that year, mixes it all together in this big malt, and then randomly fertilizes her eggs. She'll lay 6 or 7 clutches of 100 eggs, so 20 of those eggs may be Jack's, 20 may be Fred, 30 may be William's, and they're all mixed. It's a great model. So every time she's laying eggs, all the fathers are contributing. So it works out quite well that way, and then they're all happy. Well, then they go away, they get little turtle cigarettes, and then what happens is the female comes up on the beach. She comes up on the beach in Australia when she's about 50 years old, 50. It takes them that long to mature. Then in the Caribbean, about 35 years old. They come up on a high tide. They don't come up during the daytime because they're too hot. They'll overheat. They crawl up onto the beach where they begin to dig a nest. And the green sea turtles will take up to 7 hours. The hawksbills, the ridleys, all those other turtles, they're up and back in 45 minutes. I guess the green sea turtles think, well, hell, I waited 50 years for this. I'm going to enjoy it. And so they'll take hours and hours in order to do this. Then what happens is when they start digging, they use 4-wheel drive. You can see the flippers here. They're just going as much as they can. And sometimes they'll dig 2, 3, 4 body pits, and they'll just keep abandoning them and keep going to another one. Sometimes because the sand, like here, keeps collapsing in, or they accidentally urinate in the nest, or they're disturbed by animals, they run into roots, they're disturbed by humans, or a variety of reasons they'll switch, but they'll sometimes dig 3, 4, 5 nest chambers before they finally decide, this is the one I want. Now this one keeps collapsing in on her, so she dug about 4 more after this. But eventually she wound up in the trees, and then boom, she starts to lay her eggs. She digs the egg chamber with her hind flippers and digs down about 3/4 of a meter, about what, what's that in inches? About 20 inches deep. And then she lays about 100 eggs. Now you notice they have little pings in them right here, because reptile eggs are leathery. They have to be. Imagine if they were chicken eggs and you were dropping them down a meter. They'd go smash, and you're laying 100 on top of each other. So they're real leathery. And then she buries them back up, as you'll see here, to try and disguise the nest so nobody will see it. And then those eggs absorb moisture from the sand, and then they swell up and they become more rigid. So she tries to disguise the whole body pit so none of the predators will know where it is. And you can see, very cryptic, isn't it? Okay. What happened here? Okay. Foxes won't know, will they? So she tries to disguise the whole thing, and then she works her way back down to the beach. Now, in this scenario, we wind up then with an island that has a whole bunch of turtle nests on it. The island I worked on, Heron Island, takes you 20 minutes to walk around at a slow pace. Very small island. This year we had 1,100 green turtles that came up and nested on the beach. An island the same size in the Northern Barrier Reef in one night had 11,000 green sea turtles on the beach at one time. Now, what's going to happen to the nest? The eggs flying everywhere. It looks like a bunch of people playing ping pong, little eggs going everywhere. So if the animal lays 6, 7, 8 nests, a small percentage of those eggs will actually hatch because they're being torn up by females on successive nights. But it's okay. They've been doing it for 170 million years. It works out just fine. And so these eggs then will stay in the ground, and then she's going to mosey back down to the lagoon, and she has to make it before sunrise comes up, because if she's out in the sun, she's going to die. She's going to overheat, and that happens a lot. So she's got to time it just perfectly to make it back down into the water. Then what she's going to do is she's going to go out in the lagoon and just kind of hang out for 15 days. She doesn't eat, she just hangs out. What she's doing is she's making a new batch of eggs. She'll crawl back up onto the beach about 15 days later, lay another 110, 120 eggs, go back out, hang out for 15 days, and she'll do that over about 2 to 3 months, not eating the whole time. We didn't know if they ate while they did this, and this was part of my study. We found out they don't eat. They just kind of go out there and they recreationally feed. And so she'll nest 6 or 7 times. Then what she does is she buries her eggs about this deep, and what happens is these eggs, when they're laid, are not males and they're not females. They're not determined. It turns out that sex of reptiles, most reptiles, isn't determined by X and Y chromosomes. It's dependent upon the temperature of the sand when they're laid. If it's 27.5 degrees centigrade, 50% of them will be males, 50% will be females. If it's higher than that, 28 degrees and above, you get all females. If it's lower than 27, you get all males. So we have an island that one side of the beach is warmer than the other, and so we have predominantly more females on our beach, on our island, than we do males. Crocodiles, it turns out, are the exact opposite. Warm temperatures produce males and cold temperatures produce females. Kind of weird. Destroys a lot of those rules of biology. Well, they stay in the ground depending upon how warm the sand is for up to 2 months. Then the little guys come bopping out. Now, they don't crawl to the surface, okay? Imagine this room here being a chamber of sand. As you and 99 of your closest siblings are bopping around down below, you're hitting the walls of the sand chamber. What's happening to the ceiling? It's falling in, isn't it? As the sand falls off the ceiling, what happens to the level of the floor? It comes up. So the more you kick around, you're getting a free ride to the surface. They keep coming up to the surface, and they only come out when it's cool. If it's too warm, they become torpid. They just hang out till it's cool. Eventually, the little guys get out, and it's an incredible sight to see these little guys come out. They look like little geriatric men when they come out. And these are all green sea turtles coming out. And then it's the 90-yard dash down to the beach, okay? Now, there are some perils in going down to the beach because, as you know, turtles can't turn themselves over. So if they flip, you have a problem, except for hatchlings. Hatchlings have that unique ability where if they flip on their back, okay, they're going down the beach and whoo, they flip over, they can just turn onto their side and then go ahead and right themselves up and continue on down the beach. Adults can't do that, so nature took care of them. Okay? Now, when they make it down to the beach, there's little holes they have to avoid, because it's the guys that live in these holes, ghost crabs, that love to take hatchlings. The hatchlings are 3 times the size of the crab, but they eat not a significant portion. They do eat quite a few hatchlings, though. Also, this guy right here, gulls, they recreationally eat hatchlings. They can't even get through the shell. What they do is they flip them over and they poke through where the yolk sac went. And they just take out a couple little fluids, and the hatchling sits there and flounders for several days or for a couple hours while it dies. But if they make it down to the beach, you have other problems. And it turns out, how do they find their way to the beach? By the brightest part of the horizon. Regardless of the time of day, even in pitch darkness, the brightest part of the sky is always going to be over the water. So that's how they orient. What happens if you have a small urban development in the back called Miami Beach? Which is going to be brighter, Miami Beach or the horizon? Miami Beach. So the little guys go up onto the beach, and you get up in the morning, the little jerky hatchlings all over the parking meters. It's a major cause of mortality. Also, getting down the beach, you see down here, sometimes they get tangled. They get tangled in the seagrass, or excuse me, in the terrestrial grass. Here's a year where we only had 90 turtles nest during the whole season. The exact same area a year later with 1,100 turtles. So the hatchling survival is greater when you have more turtles. And then these little guys make it onto the reef, and the reef flat is where the majority of them get eaten. And waiting for them in the reef flat are fish, which gobble them up like crazy. There are also sharks, which eat them up like crazy. About 1 out of every maybe 1,000 to 10,000, out of every 10,000 rather, will make it to sexual maturity. Sometimes they go out into the middle of the ocean where they spend the first couple of years of life as plankton. They can't swim against a current. They're actually planktonic, living in large mats of sargassum weed in the middle of the Atlantic, in the case of the Atlantic. So they're actually plankton. Now, with respect to research, trying to talk about what we're doing in research here, I'm going to cruise along here a little bit and forget this gentleman and tell you where I'm doing my work. This is Queensland, Australia. The barrier reef goes all the way up from New Guinea all the way down here to the Gold Coast. I'm working right down here off this little place called Gladstone at the very southern tip of the Great Barrier Reef. Okay, and this is my island. This is where I work. This is where I spent 7 months living on the island. This is Heron Reef right here. Here's Heron Island with Starry Reef, and we're 50 miles off the coast. So it takes quite a while to get out. It's a beautiful little place, though. It beats the heck out of Temple City, okay? And here's one of the islands close by across the bay called Wreck Island, largest loggerhead nesting beach in the world. Here's another one called Wilson Island, a very important green sea turtle nesting beach. Here's another one here, which is Northwest, the most important green sea turtle nesting beach in the southern Great Barrier Reef. Paul, if you could switch projectors here real fast. What I want to do now is tell you what I'm doing down there. What I wanted to do when I did my research project was do a research project that had some utility to it. I wanted to do a project that was going to do something rather than research for the sake of research. So I wanted to work on sea turtles and green sea turtles and find out what they ate and why they ate it. You say, well, who really cares what they eat and why they ate it? Well, it turns out that we're in a time period now where animals are becoming rapidly endangered, and we're assigning areas for them to live. We say, you may live here. This is your official reserve. We know what's required for a nesting beach because most of the work's been done on nesting beaches. We don't know what's required for them in a feeding ground. So before we can set aside areas for habitats for them to live the remainder of their lives in, we need to know what they eat and why they eat it. And that was the purpose of my study. It's the first study in the world to find out what sea turtles eat in a coral reef community. So if we're going to preserve them, we need to know that. Now what I do, this is Heron Lagoon right here, and it actually looks like that. It's incredibly beautiful. We go out into the lagoon in our handy little boat and we look for turtles. Now all these pictures are taken on beautifully calm days because when it's rough and the waves are coming over the bow, you're trying to keep the boat from sinking. You're not taking pictures. So it rarely looks like this. What we do is we go out through the lagoon in a little boat and we look for sea turtles. You can see our little boat in the bottom left-hand side, and we look for something that looks like a sea turtle that's swimming along. When someone finds one, they say, there it is. And if it's on a sandy bottom like this loggerhead, it's real easy to see. But that's kind of rare. Usually it's a little dot that happens to be moving. So what's that? Nope, green, okay? This is a green on the left right here, and this little dot here, and they're very, very difficult to see. But if you get a hold of one, what we do is we chase them in the boat to tire them out a little bit. Then you get some person who wants to dive upon this turtle. This is called the rodeo technique. We're the only team in the world that does it. We adapted it from the Aborigines in northern Australia, which do it. You chase a turtle, and when it gets lined up, what you do is you jump on the turtle. Keep in mind that you're jumping on a turtle that weighs 2 to 3 times your body weight, is a hell of a better swimmer than you are, and does not want to be taken to the surface. So you dive upon this turtle, and if all goes well, you're going to land on it. A lot of interesting dive techniques from volunteers over the years. Here's the jackknife routine. Here's the, oh my God, I've fallen. I'm going to go face first on it. Here's the swan dive, butt up. This is the Forbes technique right here. And then here we have this is a guy who would never jump. And so I've learned if I turn the boat really fast, he would fall overboard and land on the turtle. So it worked out fine. And here's somebody going down. This guy was Mr. Suction Cups. He never missed anything at all, but he would always jump through the waves. I've never seen the turtle. He'd jump through the waves and he'd always get them. Some people, on the other hand, are so confident they'd even measure the turtle for you before they'd come back to the boat. This is Paul. I'm going to catch it, Greg. We'll need about this much room, okay? Open it up. And that was Paul, who was foolish enough to come down and do this with his body with me last Easter. And then if all goes well, then you have a turtle under the water, then you have to bring the guy to the surface, and that doesn't work very well because once again, they swim a heck of a lot better than you do. So you wrestle around a little bit, you talk in its ear, you say, come on, this won't hurt you much, let's go up to the surface. Then finally you get them up to the surface, and if all goes well, you wind up at the surface, and now the turtle starts flapping you in the face. You break noses. We've had broken noses, broken jaws, broken ears. We had an avulsed eye. It's really an interesting sport, okay? So then if all goes well, and there's Paul saying, I got it, I told you it was this big. And then the boat is there theoretically, and then we get it into the boat. Now, notice the size of the turtle. Notice the size of the boat. The next problem is getting it into the boat. So you get some people who don't like their lower back disc, and then they try and do the grunt and groan method and get it into the boat. Now, it's a critical point at which the boat is sinking and the turtle is going in. So eventually you get it into the boat, you measure the turtle, and then if all goes well and the boat is still afloat, you go out and you dive on another turtle, and you catch a couple more. And you do it again. And you get a couple more. And you do it again. And you get a couple more. These boats never sink. Okay? And then if all goes well, you wind up with 13 turtles at the end of the day. Now, we take them back to the beach. This looks like a plane wreck. We take them back to the beach, and then we do a very high-tech position here, the grunt and groan method of weighing. We weigh these things. We take them up the beach with a high-technical piece of equipment here. And then this is what a good day at the turtle races looks like. These are all animals that are quite alive. We just put them on their backs. And then what we do is we tie them up. We tie them up, and then this is where Forbes comes in. What we're going to do is have them volunteer their food. We need to find out what they were eating. So what we do is we put a little gag in their mouth here, and then you notice everybody is smiling in this picture except the turtle. Okay? And then what we do here is I do a gastric lavage. I do the same technique that you would do on humans. The small tube is putting water down the throat of the turtle. The large tube is going to bring out the chunky bits. Now, this doesn't hurt the turtle because the turtle, here's Paul, very deep in thought, my God. Is this morally correct to do this? Okay. Here's the inside of esophagus. See all these little spines that are on here? The esophagus that I'm putting the tube down has these spines. Here's food down here. And what happens is when the turtle swallows food underwater, it swallows a lot of water. So it has to purge the water back out without losing the food. So this acts like baleen. So when I'm putting the tube down, I'm just going against those little spines. So we can't hurt the turtle. If all goes well, the little chunky bits come out of the tube. They're collected in a little bag. And then Forbes comes back to the United States with 600 great little samples of vomit to sift through and find out what they've been eating. And this is what it looks like. It turns out it's completely undigested because I'm just taking it from the esophagus. It's very easy to identify. It doesn't stink. It's not disgusting. They've just eaten it minutes before we got them. Now, with respect to sexing the turtles, we have a problem. You can't sex turtles unless they're huge turtles. When they're large, the males get this large tail which has the penis in it. If you have a hard shell on you, you have some plumbing problems when it comes time to reproduce. You can't open up your Velcro and bring out the male genitalia, so all the plumbing is out in the tail. But until they're sexually mature, you can't tell what sex they are. So what we do here is we do a laparoscopy. Here's a very large tail, 1/2 meter long, popular turtle. Okay? And here is another characteristic of the males we talked about, the very large claw. So what I do is I make a little incision here. This is the turtle, heads down this way. Here's hind flipper, and this is the inside of the groin. Make a little incision. We do this without anesthesia. I can do the whole procedure in about 15 minutes. We pop in a little thing called a cannula. They do the same thing in humans. It's the same equipment we're using. Poke a little hole inside. What we're going to try and do is find out what sex they are. We inflate them. This is an air hose. We make little turtle balloons that moves all the organs inside. And what we're trying to do is look at the gonads and find out what sex we're looking at. And so we look down inside, and what you actually see when you look through the laparoscope is this. This is a female. See the eggs right here? So we know that's a female. You can get a breeding history, several-year breeding history, and find out whether they've bred in the last couple of years. Here's a male. This is testes coming right down here. So we get a lot of information about the sex and the breeding history of these animals. Then we make a little suture. We pop them back in the water. They're just fine. We make any other measurements we have to make. And then we've also done some telemetry work on them. And then we give them some flipper tags. Everybody leaves with the prize. It's like the dentist. We give them a nice new set of tags, and then they go back into the water. Takes them a few minutes to recuperate, and then they're on their way off into the water. Now, the last part of my study you need to do, that's what they're eating. What do they eat? Finish it in a couple minutes. We go out onto the reef. We have a series of sampling areas. We have these poles on the reef where we're going to find out what algae was available for them to eat. So we go off onto the reef, and we take photographs. We have a special little system we've designed to take photographs on the reef and find out what algae is available for them, and we take that back and analyze. The most important part here is not the photography, it's the person on shark patrol. That's this person's job to watch out for these. We had a very big problem with tiger sharks. Very large tiger sharks were present all the time. They eat adult loggerhead turtles. They bite them into and swallow shell and all. So we always had somebody who was on shark patrol watching. We then collect algae. I take it back to the lab and I do a biochemical analysis to find out what's the most nutritious for them. And then we return to the island and we call it quits. Now, in conclusion here, what's the prognosis for turtles? Not very good. They're all critically endangered species for reasons we've already mentioned. They're being harvested for meat. It's unfortunate. There isn't much meat in them. The dark spots are the meat. This is a harvest of a turtle. And then eggs are also being collected. If they come up and nest on the beach, you can collect their eggs. What we have here is a situation, this is a controlled harvest in Costa Rica. These are bags of olive ridley turtle eggs. And so you can see the harvest worldwide is just phenomenal. They're also brought up in shrimp trawls and fish trawls where they drowned in the nets. In excess of 45,000 per year in the United States alone die in shrimp trawls. And then we're seeing more and more of this on the beach. Habitat destruction. We like to build our communities where the turtles like to lay their eggs. So if this continues, we're going to see a heck of a lot more of this and a heck of a lot less of this. And this is the intent of my study, is to develop a habitat profile so we can set aside areas for sea turtles. They're not going to be with us for much longer. We're trying to do the best we can. If I can develop a system that says these are the components you need, these are the groceries that a sea turtle needs, these are the areas we need to set aside, then hopefully these sea turtles will be around for the next generation. They've been on the planet for 170 million years. It is unlikely, as we sit here today, that we will see any sea turtles by the time the next generation grows up. 4 or 5 species will probably go extinct in our lifetime. It doesn't look real good. If you're concerned, be aware that all nations are harvesting turtles except the first world countries. If you're interested, there's some forms, front and back petitions. I don't have time to go into it. But next time you see a turtle, give it a chance, kind of like a blind date. Give them a chance, get to know it, and hopefully you'll appreciate them a little bit more. Thank you. We'll see you later.
Ridley, R-I-D-L-E-Y, Ridley turtle.
He's
And
slightly
they're in the
rare,
Atlantic
so can't
areas.
find.
Hi there.
That is
This is a hawksbill sea turtle. This is the guy that's come up, and so they harvest these turtles just for the shell. And this is about as dark as they'd harvest them. Once they get darker than this, they won't take them anymore. But you're looking at several hundreds of thousands worldwide taken per year because of this. Yeah. So, oh, they're on the way out. Got it. Yeah, no, they're definitely on their way out. And I'd say they're sold as curio items like this also. This came from Ensenada. And yeah, people bring them back into the farms, you know, from Florida, and they say thank you very much.
the history of the Earth, actually. Can you trace it?
170 million years for almost all the species of turtles. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Considering humans have been around for about 4.5, something like that
One day
million
flies
years.
if it comes
Yeah,
down.
it's just
God
incredible.
knows how long we will be there.
Yeah. But, thank you.
We have the right to destroy all that. The whole
Yeah, we know. It's a real problem. They're definitely on their way out.
nature
What you see before you, you're not going to see in another couple decades. These things, this is endangered, this is endangered, this is endangered, this is almost extinct, this is endangered, this is endangered.
Endangered because of us, right?
Yeah, habitat destruction, ORVs, things of that nature. Yeah, very big problem, no doubt about it.
The Earth would be better off without it.
Could you,
Okay, thank
one
you.
last time, identify each one of these for me, real quick?
Sure. This is a green sea turtle. This is a youngster. This is probably only about 5 to 10 years old. They get to be much larger than that. And this animal down here is a Berlandier's desert tortoise. It's from Texas. That's a full-grown male. This is a California desert tortoise, and this is a full-grown female.
I thought I remember.
This one right here is an African hinchback. It's the transitional group between tortoises and turtles. It has characteristics of both.
Oh,
This is a box turtle, a desert box turtle or wood turtle, and this is the hawksbill sea turtle. The hawksbill sea turtle is critically endangered because the shell plates are actually harvested.
dumb question, but what's the difference between
Rocks flat,
Yes,
tortoises.
yes,
Okay, and they have just one opening where the eggs and feces and urine and everything comes out. There's a gland around there on turtles that they can exchange oxygen through, so they can hibernate in water. Tortoises don't have that, so no anal gland and elephant feet.
They are older than the tortoises.
No, not necessarily. They develop kind of parallel, yeah.
This is a turtle.
Yes, they do. Exception, this is the only one in the world that lives in a marsh.
And it's the transitional species between tortoises and turtles. You always have to have a transitional species. Thank you very much. Well, they were all kind of... Now, these two are mine. This is Mike Shermer's, the teacher in our department. That was Mike Shermer's, and these were taken from Customs Service, confiscated. Are you in here right now, Larry? We're out of here.
Hey, no problem.